My neighbors hated my dog, so I built the most amazing dog park next door. Their reaction was priceless. You ever meet neighbors who just can't mind their own business? Well, that's my life, except they made it their mission to hate my dog. Complaints about barking, dirty looks every time we walked by, and even threats to call animal control. At first, I tried to keep the peace, but they pushed me too far. So I decided to get creative. I built something that turned their lives upside down, a dog park, right next door. And when they saw it, their reaction was absolutely priceless. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. When I first moved into my neighborhood, I thought it was perfect. Quiet streets, a nice community vibe, and plenty of space for me and my golden retriever, Bailey, to enjoy. Bailey is the sweetest dog you'll ever meet. Friendly, well-behaved, and full of energy. Honestly, she's like a little ray of sunshine in my life. But apparently, not everyone shared my love for her. It started small. My next-door neighbors, the Johnsons, would give me disapproving looks whenever I took Bailey out for a walk. At first, I brushed it off. Not everyone is a dog person, right? But then the complaints started rolling in. "The barking is out of control," Mrs. Johnson snapped one afternoon when I was watering my lawn. I was genuinely confused because Bailey rarely barked unless someone came to the door, and even then, it was just a few short woofs. "I'll try to keep her quiet," I said politely, though I didn't really know what else I could do. But it didn't stop there. A week later, I found a note taped to my door. "Keep your dog under control or we'll have to take action." Take action? What did that even mean? I wanted to confront them, but I didn't want to escalate things. So I tried to be even more cautious. I made sure Bailey never barked outside, and I even adjusted our walk schedule to avoid running into them. But no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. They complained about her fur blowing onto their lawn. They claimed she looked aggressive when she wagged her tail too hard. It was ridiculous, but I tried to stay calm. That was until the day I overheard Mrs. Johnson loudly telling another neighbor that she was considering calling animal control on Bailey for being a nuisance. That was the last straw. I wasn't going to let them bully me or my dog any longer. After overhearing Mrs. Johnson's threat, I was furious. Bailey wasn't just my pet. She was family. The thought of someone calling animal control on her, especially when she'd done nothing wrong, lit a fire in me. But instead of confronting the Johnsons directly, I decided to channel my frustration into something productive. At first, I wasn't sure what to do. I could file a complaint against them for harassment, but I didn't want to get caught up in a petty back and forth. I needed something bigger, something that would send a clear message that Bailey wasn't going anywhere, and that I wasn't the kind of person to be intimidated. That's when the idea hit me. There was an empty lot right next to my house. It had been sitting unused for years, and rumor had it that the owner was looking to sell. The lot wasn't huge, but it was big enough for one thing: a dog park. At first, the thought seemed outrageous. Who builds a dog park just to spite their neighbors? But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Not only would it give Bailey a place to run around and play, but it would also attract other dog lovers to the neighborhood, people who might not appreciate the Johnsons' anti-dog attitude. I started doing some research and quickly found out that the lot was indeed for sale. The price was steep, but I'd been saving for years and had a little extra cash tucked away. It would take a significant chunk of my savings, but the thought of turning the empty lot into something amazing, something for Bailey and other dogs, felt worth it. The next day I contacted the owner and made an offer. By the end of the week, the paperwork was in motion. The lot was mine. Now, the real work began. The moment the lot became mine, I went all in. I started sketching out ideas for the dog park, pulling inspiration from some of the best ones I'd seen online. This wasn't going to be just a patch of grass with a fence around it. No, I wanted it to be something spectacular, something that would make every dog and their owner wag their tails with excitement. I hired a landscaping company to help bring my vision to life. The plan included agility courses, shaded seating areas, a small fountain for dogs to cool off in, and even a separate section for smaller or older dogs who preferred a gentler environment. I spared no expense. If the Johnsons thought they could scare me into submission, they were about to get the surprise of their lives. Of course, the construction didn't go unnoticed. The Johnsons were watching every move from their front porch, glaring at me like I'd just declared war. "What are you building over there?" Mr. Johnson asked one afternoon, unable to contain his curiosity. "Oh, just a little something for the neighborhood," I replied casually, keeping the details vague. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of knowing what was coming. Let them stew in their own assumptions for a while. As the weeks went by, the dog park began to take shape. The landscaping team worked tirelessly, and I even rolled up my sleeves to help out where I could. Seeing the transformation was incredibly rewarding. What had once been an empty, overgrown lot was now turning into a vibrant, welcoming space for dogs and their humans. Word started to spread around the neighborhood. Dog owners I'd never even spoken to before stopped by to ask about the project, their faces lighting up when I told them what it was. "This is amazing," one woman said. "We've needed something like this for years." Hearing that made all the hard work worth it. This wasn't just about sticking it to the Johnsons anymore. It was about creating something positive, something that would bring people together, and maybe even make the Johnsons realize they'd been wrong about Bailey all along. Or at least, that's what I hoped. After weeks of hard work, the dog park was finally finished. The grass was lush and green, the agility equipment gleamed under the sunlight, and the small fountain sparkled like a jewel. I even added a little wooden sign at the entrance, "Bailey's Bark Park." I decided to host a grand opening, complete with balloons, snacks for the humans, and dog treats for the furry guests. I printed flyers and handed them out to everyone in the neighborhood, even the Johnsons, though I wasn't sure they'd show up. The day of the opening was perfect. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and people started showing up in droves. Dogs of all shapes and sizes bounded into the park, their tails wagging as they explored the space. Owners mingled, chatting and laughing as their pets played together. It was exactly what I'd envisioned. A happy, vibrant community brought together by their love of dogs. And then, like clockwork, the Johnsons appeared. They stood at the edge of the park, arms crossed, their faces a mix of confusion and annoyance. I could tell they were trying to figure out how to react. On one hand, they clearly weren't thrilled about the influx of dogs so close to their property. But on the other hand, they couldn't deny that the park was impressive. Mrs. Johnson finally broke the silence. "So, you did all this just for your dog?" I smiled. "Not just for Bailey, for everyone. A place where dogs can run and play without bothering anyone." She didn't respond, but I caught the faintest flicker of something that almost looked like guilt on her face. What surprised me most, though, was what happened next. A young couple with a small terrier walked over and introduced themselves to the Johnsons. They chatted for a while, and I saw Mrs. Johnson's expression soften as the little terrier wagged its tail and licked her hand. Maybe, just maybe, the park was already working its magic. Over the next few weeks, the dog park became the heart of the neighborhood. It wasn't just a place for dogs. It became a gathering spot for people, too. Parents brought their kids to watch the dogs play, joggers stopped by for a break, and dog owners formed new friendships. To my surprise, the Johnsons started coming around. At first, they stayed on the sidelines, watching with their usual disapproving expressions. But one day, I noticed Mr. Johnson walking through the park, chatting with one of the other dog owners. A few days later, I saw Mrs. Johnson sitting on one of the benches, sipping coffee and actually smiling, as a golden doodle chased its tail nearby. And then, the moment I never expected happened. They got a dog. It was a small, scruffy mutt with floppy ears and a wagging tail that seemed permanently stuck on happy mode. I found out through one of the other neighbors that the Johnsons had adopted it from a local shelter. Apparently, Mrs. Johnson had been inspired after seeing how much joy the other dogs brought to the park. I couldn't believe it. The same people who had once complained about every little thing Bailey did were now proud dog owners themselves. One day, as I was walking Bailey in the park, Mrs. Johnson approached me with her new dog in tow. "I have to admit," she said, scratching her dog behind the ears, "I wasn't thrilled when you started this whole project, but it's actually been kinda nice." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. She sighed. "We were wrong about Bailey, and about you. This park is wonderful." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to rub it in, to remind her of all the times she'd made my life miserable. But instead, I just smiled and said, "I'm glad you think so. and I meant it. After that conversation, things began to shift. The Johnsons, who once seemed to have made it their mission to hate everything about me and Bailey, started becoming more approachable. I'd see Mr. Johnson tossing a tennis ball for their scruffy little dog, or Mrs. Johnson chatting with other dog owners, laughing at the antics of the pups tearing around the park. It felt surreal. These were the same people who had threatened to call animal control on Bailey, and now they were regulars at Bailey's Bark Park. They even started greeting me when I walked by, instead of glaring at me from their porch. One afternoon, Mrs. Johnson approached me again, this time holding a small box. "I wanted to give you this," she said, a little hesitantly. I opened the box to find a set of custom dog treats with Bailey's name stamped on them. "It's just a small thank you," she said quickly, as though she was embarrassed. "This park has really brought the neighborhood together. We've met so many great people and dogs because of it." I was stunned. For so long, I'd thought of the Johnsons as the villains in my story. But now, standing there with Mrs. Johnson awkwardly thanking me, I realized that maybe people weren't as black and white as I'd made them out to be. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "That means a lot." From that day on, things were different. The tension between us was gone, replaced by something that almost felt like friendship. It wasn't overnight, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And Bailey? She seemed to love their little scruffy dog, too. The two of them were practically inseparable whenever they were at the park. As the weeks turned into months, I started noticing just how much the dog park had changed the neighborhood. People who'd barely spoken before were now organizing group events, from doggy playdates to weekend barbecues right there in the park. It felt like the entire community had come alive, all thanks to Bailey's Bark Park. What really surprised me, though, was how much the Johnsons had embraced it. Not only did they show up regularly, but they also started helping out. Mr. Johnson built a little wooden box to hold extra poop bags, and Mrs. Johnson started bringing homemade dog treats to share with everyone. It was such a complete 180 that I sometimes wondered if I'd stepped into an alternate reality. One day, during a community event at the park, Mr. Johnson stood up to make an announcement. He held a clipboard and cleared his throat, looking a little nervous. "I just wanted to say," he began, "this park has been a blessing to our neighborhood. It's brought us all together in ways I don't think any of us expected." He paused, glancing at me. "And I owe a big apology to someone here. When this project started, I didn't understand it. I thought it was a nuisance, but I was wrong. This park, and you, have made this community better. So, thank you." The small crowd clapped, and I felt my face flush. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, but hearing those words meant more than I could express. Later that evening, as I walked home with Bailey, I thought about how far things had come. What had started as an act of defiance had turned into something so much bigger. The park wasn't just about me or even Bailey anymore. It was about the people and dogs who had found connection, joy, and community in that little patch of land. After Mr. Johnson's public apology, things in the neighborhood reached a level of harmony I never thought possible. The Johnsons weren't just regulars at Bailey's Bark Park. They became some of its biggest advocates. Mrs. Johnson started a social media page for the park, posting photos of the dogs playing and sharing updates about upcoming events. Even more surprising, she asked for my help with it. "Turns out," she said one day with a sheepish laugh, "you're a lot better at this community building thing than I gave you credit for." Working on the page together gave us time to actually talk, and I learned things about the Johnsons I'd never known before. They had moved to the neighborhood after retiring, hoping for peace and quiet. That explained their initial hostility toward Bailey. They weren't used to the liveliness that comes with having a dog around. But now, they admitted, they couldn't imagine life without their scruffy little mutt, or without the park. Meanwhile, the park itself was thriving. Donations from neighbors started pouring in, and we used the funds to add new features: a shaded pavilion, a small library for dog training books, and even seasonal decorations. During the holidays, we strung up lights and hosted a Paws and Claws event, where people could take photos of their dogs with Santa. The sense of pride I felt every time I stepped into the park was overwhelming. What had once been an empty lot and a source of stress had become a symbol of unity and joy. And the best part? Bailey was happier than ever. She had more friends, more space to play, and more love from the community than I ever could have imagined. But just when I thought the story had reached its happy ending, something incredible happened. One sunny afternoon, while I was throwing a ball for Bailey at the park, I noticed a small group of people walking toward me. Among them were Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, along with a few other neighbors who had been regulars at the park since it opened. "Hey!" Mrs. Johnson called out, waving me over. "We've got something for you." Curious, I walked up to the group, Bailey trotting happily by my side. Mrs. Johnson held a small envelope, which she handed to me with a wide smile. "What's this?" I asked, looking around at the grinning faces. "Open it!" someone urged, clearly excited. I tore open the envelope and pulled out a card. Inside was a handwritten note thanking me for everything I'd done for the neighborhood, and a second envelope tucked inside. When I opened the second envelope, I was stunned to find a gift certificate for a luxurious weekend getaway. Dog-friendly, of course. "We all chipped in," Mr. Johnson explained. "You've done so much for us, and we wanted to show our appreciation. You deserve a break, and so does Bailey." I was speechless. I don't know what to say," I stammered, feeling my throat tighten with emotion. "Just say thank you," Mrs. Johnson said with a wink. The gesture meant more to me than I could put into words. It wasn't just about the gift, it was about the fact that these people, who had once been strangers and, in the Johnsons' case, adversaries, had become a second family. That weekend, I packed up Bailey and headed to a cozy cabin in the mountains, where we spent 2 blissful days hiking, relaxing, and enjoying the fresh air. It was exactly what I needed, and it gave me time to reflect on just how much my life and my neighborhood had changed. When Bailey and I returned from our weekend getaway, we headed straight to the park. It was late afternoon, and the sun cast a golden glow over the lush grass. As I stood there watching the dogs play and the owners chat, I felt a wave of gratitude. This little park, born out of frustration and defiance, had become so much more than I'd ever imagined. It wasn't just a place for dogs to run or for neighbors to gather. It was a symbol of what can happen when you turn negativity into something positive. I thought about the Johnsons, who had gone from my biggest critics to my biggest supporters. Their transformation reminded me that people are capable of change, even when it seems unlikely. And while I'd built the park to make a point, I ended up building something that changed my own perspective as much as it changed theirs. Bailey trotted up to me then, her tail wagging, her scruffy little park buddy not far behind. She gave me that look, her "thank you for everything" look, and I knelt down to ruffle her ears. "We did it, girl," I whispered. "We really did it." This journey taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the best way to deal with negativity is to build something positive. The Johnsons may have started as my enemies, but in the end, they became allies and even friends, all because of one crazy idea and a lot of hard work. So, what about you? Have you ever turned a tough situation into an opportunity? Or had someone surprise you by changing for the better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And hey, if you like this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales about growth, resilience, and a little bit of drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.